They weren't executed because they were witches. They were executed because everyone else was afraid. In 1692, Salem wasn't a town obsessed with magic or spells or the occult. It was a town obsessed with sin, with the constant fear that God was watching, judging, and preparing to punish. This was a world where nothing happened by accident. Every failed harvest was a warning. Every sick child was a test. Every sudden death was a message from God Himself. And when life went wrong, Salem didn't ask why. It asked who was to blame. Salem was governed by religious absolutism. Church and state weren't separate, they were fused. Ministers didn't just guide souls, they shaped laws, influenced courts, and defined morality. Politics flowed from theology, justice flowed from belief, and fear flowed through everything. People were taught that the devil was real, active, and constantly searching for entry points. That Satan didn't attack openly, but worked through neighbors, friends, even family. Then something happened that shattered the fragile balance. The screams began. Young girls, some barely teenagers, started experiencing violent fits. They convulsed, they clawed at the air. They cried out in pain, claiming invisible forces were choking them, pinching them, dragging them into darkness. Doctors examined them and found no physical cause, no illness, no injury. In a society ruled by faith, there was only one remaining explanation: the devil. Suddenly, the question was no longer what's happening to these girls. It became who is working for Satan. And once that question was asked, everything changed. Accusations spread faster than reason could keep up. Neighbors turned on neighbors, servants accused masters, children accused adults. Long-standing grudges, arguments over land, inheritance, reputation, resurfaced, now wrapped in the language of righteousness. Being disliked became dangerous. Being different became suspicious. Being outspoken, poor, isolated, or simply inconvenient became a liability. And the most dangerous part of all, the accusations didn't require proof. Salem accepted something called spectral evidence, the belief that a person's spirit could leave their body and harm others in visions or dreams. If someone claimed they saw your ghost tormenting them, that was enough. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no opportunity to disprove it. Just fear, spoken aloud and taken as truth. Once accused, there was no safe response. Deny the charge, and it proved you were lying to protect the devil. Confess, and you might survive, but only if you named someone else. Fear didn't just spread, it organized itself. Fear turned into a system that rewarded accusations, a system that punished doubt, a system that fed on itself. By the time people began to sense something was wrong, the machinery was already in motion. Special courts were formed, jails filled, gallows were constructed, and Salem crossed a line it could never uncross. Because now, the town wasn't hunting witches anymore. It was hunting itself. And the executions were no longer a possibility. They were inevitable. Once the trials began, logic didn't argue its case. It simply left the room. Salem didn't just allow accusations, it institutionalized them. In the spring of 1692, colonial authorities created a special court with a singular mission: identify witches quickly and restore order. This was not a court designed to seek truth. It was designed to deliver certainty, and certainty demanded speed. Judges were not neutral observers. They were devout Puritans who already believed the devil was active in their community. To them, Satan wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical force, recruiting agents in secret. Within that worldview, Doubt wasn't a safeguard. It was a failure of faith. Questioning an accusation meant questioning God's will. So the rules began to bend. Then they broke completely. Spectral evidence became the backbone of the court. If an accuser claimed your spirit appeared to them in a dream and caused pain, that testimony carried weight. If they collapsed in the courtroom, screaming and convulsing while pointing at you, judges treated it as confirmation. No one asked how a spirit could be proven. No one asked why only certain people saw these visions. Reality no longer mattered. Perception did. The accused were trapped in a no-win equation with only two outcomes, and neither involved innocence. Confess and you might live, not because the court believed you were guilty, but because repentance aligned with their theology. A confession proved the system worked. Refuse, and you were labeled unrepentant, an agent of Satan refusing to surrender. That resistance marked you as dangerous, and dangerous people were executed. Confessions exploded almost overnight, not because Salem was filled with witches, but because survival demanded compliance. Fear rewired behavior. People said whatever the court wanted to hear, and every confession came with a price. Names. To prove sincerity, the accused had to identify others, friends, neighbors, family members. Every confession fueled the next accusation, and every accusation justified the system's existence. That's how the trials spread. One accusation unlocked another. One name dragged a new body into the courtroom. The web expanded outward, swallowing respected church members, wealthy landowners, and even those who had once accused others. No one was safe. Not status, not faith, not loyalty. Meanwhile, personal motives hid in plain sight. Property disputes conveniently disappeared when the accused were jailed. Land changed hands. Inheritances were delayed or erased. Old grudges found legal cover under divine authority. The trials offered something intoxicating. Power without accountability. Revenge without guilt. Justice without evidence. By summer, Salem had stopped asking whether the accused were guilty. The question became, how many more names could be extracted before fear lost its grip? 19 people were hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death under heavy stones for refusing to plead, silenced without ever being tried. Families were forced to watch. Ministers prayed over the executions, and the town told itself this was necessary, that it was righteous, that it was justice. But beneath the certainty, cracks were forming. Accusations began to contradict each other. Confessed witches recanted their stories. Accusers accused accusers. And then something unthinkable happened. Even the judges' families were named. Slowly, a question surfaced. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. What if the devil wasn't here at all? What if Salem had built a killing machine fueled by fear and had no idea how to turn it off? Because the moment that question was asked, the entire system began to collapse. By the fall of 1692, the trials were no longer exposing evil. They were exposing themselves. Accusations had become too chaotic to control. Confessions clashed, testimonies unraveled, and the unthinkable happened. The accused began pointing upward. When respected ministers, judges' relatives, and the governor's own wife were named, fear changed sides. Suddenly, authority was no longer immune. The credibility of spectral evidence cracked. Clergy across New England began speaking out, warning that visions and dreams could not be trusted in a court of law. Even within Salem, doubt crept in where certainty once ruled. Governor William Phipps finally intervened. He shut down the court of oyer and terminer and barred spectral evidence from future trials. Almost overnight, the machinery of death stalled. Prison doors opened, accusations evaporated, but it was already too late. 19 people were dead. Families were ruined, reputations erased, and the town faced a truth more terrifying than witches: that it had killed innocent people on nothing but fear. There was no dramatic reckoning, no mass confession, just a quiet, uncomfortable ending. Survivors were released without apologies. Executions stopped without justice. Years later, Salem tried to clean its conscience. Courts ruled the trials unlawful. Some families received compensation. Church leaders issued statements of regret. But regret doesn't resurrect the dead. The trials faded into history, often reduced to folklore and costumes. But the mechanism behind them never disappeared. Because Salem didn't fail due to ignorance. It failed because fear was allowed to outrank evidence. Because belief replaced proof. Because dissent was treated as danger. And that mechanism still exists. Which brings us to the most unsettling part of this story. Salem wasn't an anomaly. It was a warning. Salem didn't end with an apology. It ended with silence. No one was punished for the executions. No judges were imprisoned. No leaders publicly accepted blame. The system that killed innocent people simply stepped aside and pretended it had never existed. That's what makes Salem uncomfortable. Not the superstition, but the familiarity. Strip away the 17th century language and the witchcraft imagery, and what remains is a pattern we still recognize. A society under stress. Leaders pressured to act. A public demanding certainty in an uncertain world. Salem shows how easily justice collapses when fear becomes evidence. When accusation is treated as truth. When disagreement is framed as threat. When speed matters more than accuracy. The people who died in Salem weren't sacrificed to ignorance. They were sacrificed to confidence. Confidence that the system couldn't be wrong. Confidence that belief was enough. That's why Salem still matters. Because history doesn't repeat itself the same way, but it rhymes. Moral panics change names. Enemies change faces. But the impulse stays the same. Find someone to blame and call it justice. Salem is remembered as a dark chapter we outgrew. But the real lesson is harder to accept. It's a chapter we never closed. And the moment fear replaces evidence again, the gallows don't need to be rebuilt. They're already there.